Hello and welcome to the Smart Money Simplified podcast with your host, Brent Mekosh. Brent, good to see you again. How are the new offices working out for you?
We're still moving in, but I'm pretty much moved into my own space here. We've got some new furniture coming soon, but overall really well. There's a lot of things. We purchased the building that we're in now, and there's things that as a tenant you don't really think about, and then now as a landlord slash tenant you think about. So we're kind of checking all those boxes off. I think our checklist is down to maybe 50 items or so until we're ready for prime time and having people visit us here. But we're getting very
Yeah,
close. Thank you.
that's great. No, I know moving such a big trauma, and you're right. It's a slightly different perspective where you sit now. So what's on the table today?
Very much so. I'm really excited about this, Geoff. I've got Geoff Eliason with me, who is coming from the investment banking world, and this is an area that's really passionate that I'm very passionate about. Working with business owners, the vast majority of them, there's really no exit strategy. If you look at particularly the boomers coming through, about half of these people that run these businesses, which are incredible enterprises that have been built over decades, are probably going to need to find some kind of succession, and it's just not in place. Most of the attempts that they will have to have a succession plan within the business, to find a growth partner, to outright sell the business, most of them will fail. About 70% of those efforts are going to fail. And of the people that are actually successful at that, most of them a year later, 2 years later, kind of regret the whole process in terms of going through it, or maybe now they've lost purpose in their life to the extent that they had it before. They don't feel like the deal went according to plan. And one of the reasons that I've got Geoff on here today, and he's a principal over at SDR Ventures, which is a boutique investment bank, is because we're both really passionate about this. We went deep offline into the discussion about this in terms of what do you do to help business owners prepare for that succession, prepare for that exit, prepare for to at least receive some kind of value, or ensure the continuality of this business that has taken so much of their life's work, and in many cases is 80-90% of their net worth is tied into this business as well. And so Geoff's got a deep experience in this world. And with that, Geoff, I'll hand it over to you to give probably a more proper introduction up to yourself. So thanks for joining us today, and what would you like to add to your background and history?
Great. Thank you, Brent. I really appreciate that introduction. I've been working in the financial industry since January 1st of 2005. And it was at that point that I was part of a financial startup that produced, at the time, an investment product that was not really well known in the marketplace, called an exchange traded fund, or ETF. And of course, now ETFs are prolific within the marketplace. And working with that startup really ignited my entrepreneurial spirit, my own entrepreneurial spirit. And a few years later, that company was acquired. I stayed on with the parent company and served in a leadership capacity, and then jumped back into the entrepreneurial pool in 2013 and built out another financial company. We were acquired in 2018 after some wonderful growth. And so that was my second personal experience with mergers and acquisitions, or M&A, and investment banking. But one thing that occurred to me, and I started to develop a thesis over the years, was that there's a real disconnect between the business owner, who is a founder, that entrepreneur, and their financial advisor, if they even have a financial advisor. And I believe, and truly what makes SDR unique, is that we believe that the financial advisor can help that business owner shepherd and steward the single biggest decision of their financial lives, that oftentimes impacts multiple generations. But it requires that business owner to really engage and invite the financial advisor into the conversation and talk about the things they should be talking about in the first place. Minimizing or mitigating taxes, estate planning, charitable strategies, retirement planning. But all of those need to work in coordination with the business and the growth of the business itself, that ultimately leads to planning for an exit. And so it was with that conviction that 3 years ago, I stepped into a CEO role and principal position of, as you mentioned, a boutique investment bank located in Denver called SDR Ventures. We've been around for 22 years now, serving founders and entrepreneurs that have built businesses with valuation anywhere from 5 to 10 million, all the way up to 250 million across virtually all industries. And in those 22 years, we have really made a name for ourselves across all industries and really being an advocate for that founder and entrepreneur. And Brent, it's rooted in the statistics you shared. It's a lack of preparation for an exit across the entire journey, from the very startup to months before they exit. Secondly, the realization that 70% of business owners actually regret selling their company in the first year that they sell. And when you ask why, we believe it's because they didn't spend the time in the months and years before the sale preparing for that moment. And so in this conversation, and what I really embrace about your work, Brent, is that collectively, we can serve the founder and entrepreneur, the business owner, from that holistic standpoint, recognizing that this decision permeates so many different aspects of their lives and actually transcends generations. And so much good can be done. And of course, it's not surprising to anyone that you have trillions of dollars in businesses owned by baby boomers that have to be sold. And one way or another, they're going to be sold. There will be a succession, whether it's because of the business owner's efforts, in spite of them, while the business owner is alive, or after they pass away. One way or another, there will be a succession. And I think we can really, really help that family have success and the desired outcome because of a thoughtful process rather than a reactive process that sadly gets forced on them more often than not.
Yeah, very true. And what I love about your story, Geoff, is that this is not theoretical to you. As you mentioned, you went through this twice yourself. You had two exits yourself. And so 2 questions for you is, first, you mentioned, you opened with the fact that you felt that the financial advisor could play and should play a more pivotal role in what the succession looks like. First question I have for you is, why do you think that's not happening?
Well, there's some practical reasons, and then there's also more intangible reasons that can and should be overcome. So a lot of times the business owner has their entire net worth in the business. And if they are working with a financial advisor, there may be a very small IRA, an even smaller Roth IRA, maybe a couple college 529 plans, maybe, but not likely, a 401k plan for the business. And so, unfortunately, the business owner just assumes the financial advisor doesn't have a whole lot to talk about. But sadly, that's just not the case. We were dealing with a company, interestingly enough, 3 generations. The company was over 100 years old. And when they showed up to our office ready to sell, there were no estate documents in place. And it was simply because they did not have the conversation with the financial advisor that would have led them to complete those estate docs and, transfer wealth across multiple generations. Sadly, a lot of times, the business owner shows up to our office, if they're not working with a financial advisor, really unsure if they're going to be financially equipped to actually retire and not outlive their wealth. And oftentimes it's because they have not sat down with a financial advisor and looked at their spending and their cash flow as a business owner. And they're oftentimes surprised how much they actually spend and live on and what it takes to maintain that lifestyle. And so a lot of times
And I think they're all
they'll say, wow, maybe I don't have enough money. And the first thing we say is, well, you need to go back to the drawing board and do some retirement planning and get your arms around what you actually need after taxes and after fees.
I think they also, in many cases, vastly underestimate how much benefit they have in terms of their lifestyle of owning that business. And when you really look at with the business taken away and some of the specific tax benefits that you have in owning that business go away, the number that they need at exit to maintain their lifestyle is very, very different than what they think it is. In many cases, it's much higher.
And Brent, there's a lot of depth to what you're saying. When they show up, they also don't realize that the person or the group buying their company is actually going to deduct from the value of the company. And I'm going to make an exaggeration to drive the point home. They're going to deduct the mother-in-law's $250,000 salary working the front desk. They're not going to account for that. It's going to take away from the value of the business.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. They got to normalize what the business operations are, coming in as an outside player with no ties to the family, no ties to the other stakeholders that have been able to participate in the revenue of that business for many, many years.
And to your point,
another
business
question I have
owners
for you, which I think
they'll take for granted how much of their personal life they're actually running through that company.
Correct. And again, normalizing what that real value of the business is after those items can be pretty significant.
Yep.
Now, you touched on something earlier that I'm really intrigued by is the 70% of the people that once they've gone through this sale, so they've killed the white whale here. They've succeeded. They had a successful sale, which already puts them in the minority of business owners. And a year later, they're deeply, in many cases, depressed, if not just dissatisfied about how that process went. What do you think? I've got my own opinions on that, but what do you think is the main reason that so many people walk away from this thing a year or two after the fact and not, instead of being incredibly happy about what they've done, they're filled with regret about how the process went down?
So if I were to put my finger on one single thing, and you actually touched on it just briefly, Brent, it's control. So over decades, that entrepreneur has had a perceived sense of control over every aspect of their lives. Whether or not that perception is reality or not could certainly be debated individual to individual, but at least they showed up every single day and they knew exactly what that day was going to hold, and they felt like they could impact the outcome. And then all of a sudden, they come into a liquidity event, and a life that felt like was very orderly becomes a life of total complexity and a sense of chaos. They wake up every day and they're not sure what to do with their day. What they do with their day doesn't feel fulfilling, especially when they run out of these bucket list items to do. A lot of times, they believed it was going to maybe put their marriage or their relationship with kids back in order, but it doesn't solve for that. Their greatest fear is that the money is going to corrupt their kids and their grandkids, but they don't know how to solve for that. They don't know how to take steps to prevent that from happening. And so they turn around after a year and they feel like they have truly lost their way, their direction. And the areas of their life that they desire to control, namely their investments, their time, and their talent, They have no control over those three things. And they felt like it was going to solve for, as I mentioned, relational strain. It a lot of times compounds that relational strain, where the spouse turns around and says, man, you should go find another job because we were better off when you were in the office rather than, just poking around at home. And so and then of course, to put a bow on this whole conversation, the reality is that individual's identity was wrapped up in that business. And when you take that identity away, if they did not spend the soul searching effort to know what their identity was or is apart from that business, it truly becomes a crisis, deep with regret. And so all of those things can be addressed, but it takes time and effort on the front end.
I completely agree with that. I think that, business is in many ways, it's a spiritual exercise, and the fact that you're doing something that's instilling you or with meaning and value and purpose to your day. It's for sure a creatively energetic exercise where you find that most entrepreneurs, they've got this internal energy that they've got to put on something. And when that business gets taken away, it gets scattered everywhere. But I think you nailed it too with the loss of identity. Just even in my own case, for the first part of my career, I worked down on Wall Street. I was a trader on the floor of the New York Stock Exchange, and left voluntarily when I was 33 because I wanted to travel for a year, which was an amazing experience. But I remember after the first 2 or 3 months of being away, literally, and it sounds silly to say this now as a 51-year-old man looking back at a 33-year-old essentially kid with no real responsibilities, but I looked in the mirror and said, well, now what? Like,
Right.
how many more kind of parties on the beach or temples you can go see or everything else, and I think that's a deeply it's a deeply disturbing experience to have if you're not ready for it. So I guess I would ask you now, first, now that you're with SDR, what do you guys do on the investment banking side to help prepare business owners for all of those issues that they're going to face? Because the money's the money, and
Right.
I'm a firm believer, like, the money solves itself when
Right.
everything else is done right. And so, how do you engage with these folks and make sure that this is a successful transition?
So the first is in talking with the business owner, understanding what their own and their family's objectives are. And so that premise of starting with the destination, the end in mind, and then working backwards. So we first want to get an understanding of, well, what's their objective? What's the destination? And then the next step is ideal if they can articulate that destination. The next step is to really encourage them before they begin the process of selling the company, assembling a team around them. And probably the most appropriate individual to sit at the center of that team with them is the financial advisor or a family office coordinator. And that coordinator, which is likely the financial advisor, is the individual that can pull the team members into the same room. So the left hand is talking to the right hand, advocating solely for the business owner. And who's that team? Without stating the obvious, the estate attorney might be a real estate attorney, the CPA, and the CPA and the estate attorney, they need to be versed in the complexity of the business owner and also the business owner post-liquidity, post-sale. So not every CPA, not every financial advisor, not every estate attorney is necessarily versed in the complexities of the business owner, and particularly the business owner post liquidity, a charitable strategist can also be vital, not only from a stewardship or philanthropy standpoint, but also just as important, minimizing and mitigating taxes, so that charitable strategists can work in coordination with the estate attorney, the CPA, and the financial advisor to minimize taxes. And you want to take those steps before the business starts through its investment banking process to be sold. Once that process gets started, it can definitely be too late, candidly. It's never too late, but in maximizing the tax benefit, it becomes too late. The other individual that can be relevant is a family or a business psychologist. Oftentimes it's not a single owner, but it may be an entire family with multiple owners, multiple stakeholders, and oftentimes they're not always aligned. And so SDR has a business psychologist that we work routinely with that get the stakeholders aligned before we actually begin the process of selling the company. A business consultant, which can help maximize the process before the business actually goes into being sold, can be invaluable. And then one of the other parts of the ecosystem that I would really encourage is a peer group of other CEOs and business owners, candidly, that probably have sold their company and can speak truth and life into what that business owner is about to embark on. And from a peer-to-peer standpoint, can be really encouraging in helping the business owner and their family get ready and get ready on multiple levels. And then, of course, the investment bank helps with the transaction itself. But Brent, it is mission critical to get that team in order, get that ecosystem surrounding you, make sure that the left hand knows what the right hand's doing, that the outcome is defined, and then there needs to be someone that's sitting at the center, and that's with the family, and that's probably the financial advisor.
Let me ask you this, Geoff. If you've got someone out there that runs a business, let's say they're 60 to 64, 65 years old, they love what they do, they don't have any plans on selling today, they're thinking this might be a problem for me in the future at 68 to 70, this is 5 or 6 years off. And everything you just said, which by the way, I agree with 110%, sounds like more work to them to put all that team together. How do you communicate the idea to them that actually today, even if you're not ready to sell, if you're actually preparing a business to sell, the operational efficiencies that are going to come out of that, the deep knowledge of your business that will come out of that, the knowledge of your competitors that will come out of that, it becomes exponential in terms of what it can do for the business itself. But all that process sounds to be incredibly overwhelming. So you're that 60, 62, 63-year-old entrepreneur that's out there that loves what he does, gets up with a spring in his step every day, knows at some point this is going to happen for him in the future, doesn't have this team in place now. What would you say to him about, or her, about the importance of putting that team together, and where do they start?
So, bear with me because your question has a tremendous amount of depth and layers to it, and I want to walk it out and unpack the different layers. So bear with me here. The first step is to find that individual, likely a financial advisor, that is going to be shoulder to shoulder with you at the very center, at what I would call the hub, in identifying the different spokes. That is the very first step that should be taken, because that person who is shoulder to shoulder with you is going to figure out what the very next step needs to be. And the next step is probably figuring out what the destination is, what your desired outcome you're trying to reach, and creating a plan around how to get to that destination. The third step is probably going to be walking out that plan. And it's probably going to include a number of steps that require interaction with the accountant, with the estate attorney, first and foremost. Maybe addressing real estate. And so the first step is getting that person at the hub with you shoulder to shoulder. The next point that I want to make is embedded in your question and your statement is an assumption that's tragically made by business owners. And if there is one thing I want listeners to take away from our time, it's the point that I'm about to make. The assumption that business owners make is that they are going to sell the company, and it's going to be similar to selling a house. They're going to find a buyer. The buyer is going to wire an extreme amount of money to their personal bank account. They are going to leave the keys to the business under the doormat, and then they are going to go to the Caribbean or Europe or whatever it is. And life will be good. Problem solved. That is just not the case. What actually happens is a business owner in the 11th hour, for whatever reason, it could be a health reason, it could be anything, and it varies person to person. They come to us and they say, okay, it's 11 p.m. I'm ready to sell, and at midnight, I want to be wearing the glass slipper and I'm out of here. Make that happen. Well, what actually happens is we create a group of buyers that creates an auction. And the buyer says, oh, that's great, but we actually realize that this business owner has built the company around themselves, and we need that business owner to stick around for 2 or 3 years. So it takes, on average, 9 months to sell a company from when the engagement gets signed to the closing table. 9 months. So about a year just to sell the business. And then, oh, by the way, the business owner is going to have to stick around 1 to 3 years. Here's the other realization. The buyer wants to incentivize that business owner to stick around and do a good job. So they really create a carrot in front of the business owner, and they apply the value of the sale to usually around 20 to 30% that rolls into equity of the new business owner. And what really surprises the business owner is that their quote unquote second bite of the apple ends up being bigger than the first bite. Well, you take that 60 to 65-year-old, and then all of a sudden they realize that the finish line is when they're 70. And where things really go sideways is their spouse thinks the same thing they thought, that, oh, this is going to be awesome. I'm going to have millions of dollars wired to my account, and I'm finally going to get my spouse back after 30 years of not having them around. And then the business owner has to go back and say, well, I didn't realize this, but I actually have to stick around for another 3 to 5 years. And it creates this angst and this regret because they didn't realize what they were actually signing up for. And Brent, just to really drive the point home, most of the businesses that come to us actually need 1 to 3 years just to get the business buttoned up and ready to sell with a business consultant. And so you've got 1 to 3 years to prepare the business to sell, 1 year to sell the business, and then 2 to 5 years that the buyer wants you to stick around. And so if you wait and it's 11 p.m. and you're 65 years old, it's another 3 to 7 years before the real exit. Business owners have no idea what you and I just exchanged, what you and I just covered. They have no idea. And if they really understood it, their calculus would be much, much different. Let me finish my point with one more thing that's absolutely mission critical. A buyer buys two things. They buy past performance, usually the past 3 to 5 years performance, and they want to see two things, generally speaking. They want to see revenue in an upward trajectory, and they want to see earnings and profitability in an upward trajectory. They don't want to see them flatlined, and they definitely don't want to see them decreasing. So the business owner, and this is contrary to kind of human nature, the business owner actually, if we're using a clock, instead of 11 p.m., they want to start preparing and they want to take that business to market around 7 or 8 p.m., 9 p.m., not 11 p.m. But the problem is human nature at 7 or 8 p.m., the business owner is thinking, man, this is as good as it gets. Why would I sell now? It's only going to keep getting better. And if I can encourage the entrepreneur with one thing, do not wait until 11 p.m. because your fate is going to get forced on you rather than the opposite.
Geoff, I think that's probably, no exaggeration, probably the most important 5 or 6 minutes there that any entrepreneur that is in that demographic that we talked about could possibly have heard. I think you nailed that. So tell me about SDR. What makes you guys different?
Yeah. So most investment banks are very focused on helping business owners sell their company and simply maximizing the sale price. SDR, because of, frankly, a lot of my background and history within financial services, really wants to advocate for that business owner across all aspects of their life. And we are committed to the business owner coming out the other side with a life of purpose and fulfillment. Because we believe that if we create that for that family across generations, the likelihood of them referring business to SDR is very high. It's very strong. And we also feel it's the right thing to do. And so we really advocate for this ecosystem, this team around them. And then lastly, we want to really emphasize understanding the best outcome for that family. And sometimes the best outcome isn't always the most money, but it's the right buyer, fulfilling a culture, and a legacy for that business owner really adds to this sense of purpose and fulfillment rather than necessarily getting the most money, but destroying culture and destroying legacy, both for the team and employees at that company, but also generationally for the business owner. And then lastly, SDR also helps business owners acquire companies, and then we help business owners raise capital for their business. And so we have been around for 22 years. We have a team of 25, primarily here in Denver, and we deal with virtually all industries with an emphasis on the founder and entrepreneur.
And where is the sweet spot for you in terms of size of the business, in terms of industry, specific industries, in terms of capitalization? Is there a spot that you know you're walking into that meeting and you have the competitive advantage?
Yeah, you bet. So SDR focuses on what's called the lower middle market. And so those are companies usually with an EBITDA north of 2 million or an earnings and profit north of 2 million. Companies that are valued usually 10 million and above. SDR is also unique in that we have an exclusive division that deals with earnings between 500,000 and 2 million. And then our traditional investment bank, our earnings north of 2 million, value over 10 million. And unfortunately, earnings and profit between 500,000 and 2 million, Brent, sadly, they get poor service a lot of times. And so we carved that out and said, we can really do a great job for that group, but then also profit north of 2 million. And so that being said, the industries begin to define themselves in those valuations. Residential services, for one, landscaping, plumbing, electrical, tree care. Those are very, very profitable businesses that are highly, highly sought after, and premiums are being paid. Of course, business services are also very popular. Medical offices, dental, vet clinics, e-commerce, manufacturing, engineering, software, SaaS companies, all very, very common and for SDR, logistics, trucking companies. And then at the same time, I can tell you what we're not. Pre-revenue, biotech, pharma, oil and gas, not very common at SDR. And then also your much larger companies that are valued north of 250 million simply falls out of the purview of lower middle market boutique investment bank like SDR.
Well, I think you bring up a great point there that, someone that's running a family business that might be in that, to your point, 500 million or 500,000 rather to 2 million of EBITDA, they don't realize that there is an enormous amount of activity out there with people looking to buy those businesses. They're highly fragmented. You have huge benefits of bringing economies of scale in place, and there's a lot of money chasing those kind of businesses. And the fact that SDR is focused on that and recognizes that and provides that high level of service to those owners, I think is exceptional and definitely needed in the marketplace. Lastly, Geoff, how do people find you? How do people contact you if this conversation resonated with anyone and they realize that, hey, this is something, you're right, it's not a 1-year decision. This could be a decision I make today that impacts greatly the next 2, 3, 5, 7 years of my life. How do they find you? How do they reach out to you?
Yeah, you bet. So we'll make sure that Bill, as the producer of the podcast, puts our contact info up. But SDR Ventures.com. And they can also reach me directly. Geoff is spelled with a G, Geoff, at SDRventures.com. And we look forward to meeting the entrepreneur, the founder, the business owner at any stage of their entrepreneurial journey. And then simply being a resource to them, meeting them where they're at, and helping them get their arms around what the destination is, and then doing whatever we can to take that next step towards their desired outcome.
Well, Geoff, I loved having this conversation with you because, again, when we spoke offline before we recorded this podcast a couple of weeks back, the passion that you have for serving these entrepreneurs and for helping them to maximize the value of their business, it came across to me. And I think no one knows except for that business owner that's run that business, the blood, sweat, the tears, the sacrifices that they made, the vacations they may have missed, the kids' soccer games they might have missed, so many stories that I've heard, really inspiring. I mean, in my case, one of my most successful clients, they didn't get there overnight. It was an incredible struggle to get there. And to the extent that we can help those people realize the true value that they've put into their businesses, I think is vitally important. So thank you for having this conversation, because I think it's an incredibly important one for us to be having now.
Oh, it's a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Yeah, that was a terrific conversation and a great listen. And Geoff will make sure that all of your contact information is put in the show notes so that if anybody wants to reach out to you, they can. Brent, thanks for facilitating this one, because I think a lot of people, when they start businesses, never give a thought to the end of the business. They're like, we're going to start this business and it's going really well and it's doing great. And, nobody would get in a car that they didn't know how to stop. But people get in businesses all the time that way. So thanks. Very interesting.
Well,
If people want to,
one way or another, the business is going to either end, it's going to die a death, or it's
yeah,
going to succeed and grow into something bigger. And there's decisions that can be made today that can change that outcome.
yep. And certainly Geoff got a lot for folks to think about. Brent, for people who are listening to this conversation who are thinking that they might like a further conversation with you, how do they reach out to you and get a hold of you?
Yeah, website is tws.finance. Phone number in here is 602-255-0555. Myself, a member of the team, will pick up. Pretty active on LinkedIn. That's our one social media platform, and you can message me there. I'm usually checking that a couple times a day. But yeah, if any of this resonated with anyone, please reach out and give us a call. And if they found this conversation meaningful, share it, because I think particularly that middle part there that Geoff outlined, and I sincerely mean that's probably the most important 5 or 6 minutes that any entrepreneur that is coming into that 60 and beyond, or thinks there might be 5 to 10 years out of selling their business, is probably the most important thing they're going to hear in a very long time. No question.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And for those of you who are listening to this podcast for the first time and you're not a subscriber, that part's easy to fix. You just reach out and hit the follow button. That way you become a subscriber. And then every time Brent issues or drops a new episode of his podcast, you'll be notified and you can give it a listen. And as Brent mentioned, if you like it, please do share it with people. Word of mouth promotion is not only valuable, we really appreciate it. Until next time, I'm Bill Tucker, thanking you on behalf of Brent and everybody at the Wealth Stewards for taking the time to listen today. And I want to remind you that you can go out today and make today a great day or not. It's up to you. It's your choice. Thanks for listening. Until next time.